Sometimes those chickens can be on that plot, depending on the crop, for weeks. And they'll even do some work for you that's really interesting. I learned this year, just from experimenting, that I can grow dry beans, okay, direct seeded in the ground, get a 6-inch spacing, 3 or 4 rows on a 30-inch bed. Crop comes, gets to desiccation point, so I stop irrigating it, late summer. It dries up. Chickens come in. They don't eat the beans. They just eat the foliage on the plants. So they actually do me a service. They strip down the plant. So when I go to harvest the dry beans, I'm pulling out plants with dried bean husks on them, full of seeds, with no foliage. So it actually makes my handling of it less work. The American mosaic and these cities with suburbs and all of these ways that we stack people into not really that good of living situations. Maybe that's time that corrected, and we go to something that is more closer to God's creation.
Hey, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for spending your valuable time right here with the Adapt 2030 channel. I have with me Curtis Stone today. Many of you know him for his growing techniques, taking city plots and what you consider houses in the urban farmer, bringing it over into a business, and then moving into the homesteading arena, helping others find the perfect homestead, and everything from A to Z while you're on your homestead to get ready, and different time of thing for raising pigs, chickens, whatever it is, different types of crops, and what you might need to be more self-sufficient. So I'm super pleased and grateful that he's here to spend some time with me to answer some questions. We just wanted to talk about, things in the economy seem to be going down, and everywhere you look, people online are talking about not making money. You see it out here in the real world. There's a huge amount of layoffs, even in tech companies. Everywhere you look, things are down. Their consumption's not there. I'm wondering, A, if it's a demographic shift where a lot less people are on the planet and the census just hasn't caught up with that yet, or if it truly is people are in a state of sort of shock or fear where they're more hesitant to spend money thinking about the future, saving money for a rainy day. Or I don't know, there's probably a few other excuses, but where there's opportunity, that could be a danger zone. The Chinese way, these two characters, they wrap into each other. Opportunity and danger make that word. What could it possibly be? Opportunity is the danger. Finding that niche and that sweet spot in the danger zone that everybody else is fearful of. And if I may, Curtis, let me start off with a quick story. I want to take you to the gold rush days, 1849. Material that was blue, and they thought it would be great tent material. But as they tried to sell it to different miners and mining camps as tent material, nobody wanted to buy it. It was too heavy. It got wet. It was soggy. So they thought they were going to go out of business, and what they did is then they pivoted and started making clothing, really hearty clothing of overalls and blue jeans out of the same material, converting from tent cover. The pivot was instant, and then suddenly we know blue jeans, Levi Strauss blue jeans today.
Wow. Yep.
And also another one, in the 1960s and 1950s, everybody was terrified of the Cold War, nuclear explosions, and there were companies that were building underground bunkers. But after the Cold War ceased and it really kind of let off around mid-1960s, those same companies that had all the machinery for digging, earthworks, etc., became swimming pool builders. Like they pivoted in a second to, they were still digging holes, lining it with concrete, but they just repurposed the purpose. What's funny, though, is those same companies that were building swimming pools from the conversion of the Cold War are now back into building bunkers again because they had, so it's like this weird. But I'm just trying to say that there's opportunity where you look, if you can pivot quickly enough and see that maybe your niche isn't what it was, but can you find a different use for that same niche? So that's how I wanted to present it. And Curtis, we were talking just briefly, and we've spoken a few times before, so let it roll, because I know so many people are interested in finding maybe some nugget of information that'll help them get out of this fear phase into action phase.
Yes.
Our national debt is a real world problem. Our government spends more in interest payments than it does funding the Pentagon. In 2010, our debt, $13 trillion, gold 1,000 an ounce. 2020, the debt was $23 trillion and gold was $1,500 an ounce. 2023, $33 trillion U.S. debt, and now $2,000 an ounce for gold. Call the proud Americans, the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late. Mention the Adapt 2030 channel. You're going to get some great in-class service. Also, Patriot Gold Group has a no fee for life IRA where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold or silver. No fee for life IRA on qualifying rollovers. Give them a call, 888-546-7020. And now on with the video.
That's what it's all about. And you know, David, you and I are both the kind of guys that just take action. And so I think we're speaking to the converted in some ways, but reiteration is always a good thing. I find I still even need reiteration today sometimes when the chips are down, and you know, you got to find your motivation, you got to find your inspiration somewhere, you know. And so hopefully we can do that for some folks today. But you know, as you said, yeah, there's opportunity in all of these things. But I mean, right now here, I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about what's going on, I think, in Canada that could set off a lot of things in motion, just like how we saw in 2008, this bank in the UK that nobody ever heard of, Lehman Brothers, all of a sudden collapsed, and that set off, you know, all kinds of stuff everywhere. What we're seeing in Canada right now, and I mean, I spent a lot of time looking at real estate. In fact, just before I started with you, I was recording a couple property reviews of places in Tennessee. Tennessee's really gone up in valuation because a lot of people are going there. But in Canada, I mean, right now, man, I mean, we have this scam mortgage thing up here called the 5-year renewal. You guys in the US are lucky. You can sign in. You know, a lot of people in 2019 might have signed in at, you know, less than 2%, or anywhere between 2019 and 2021, they could have signed up for maybe less than 2%. And then you got that for 30 years. In Canada, you have to renew that and renegotiate it every 5 years. So all these people, the most amount of homeowner properties were purchased in Canadian history in 2019. 68.6% of people bought their homes that they live in today at that time. Interest rates were low, valuations were to the moon. What happens when the streams cross? So that's where we're going. We're going into the beginning of a 5-year cycle that could last a few years, where everybody's property is going to come up for renewal, and they will not be able to afford the interest payment. They will not be able to pay the monthly payment. We're seeing already people folding that had a $2,000 a month mortgage. They're folding now because the rate at 6.5% literally triples their mortgage. They can't pay it. And so we're about to see a massive inventory come on the market, and I think it's going to set off a deflationary period. And you know, you listen to guys like Mike Maloney, they've talked about this for a long time, not so much in relation to real estate, because I'm more in the real estate game, but looking at what happens when everybody goes to sell their property at once. Well, then the price goes down. It has to, right, in order to compete. And so that could set off a lot of other things too. But I mean, you know, pick your issue. A lot of things are coming to a head right now. I don't look at that as doom and gloom. I look at it that as, let's get the information at people so that they can help themselves and they can do something about it. And so if anybody in the audience is Canadian, you know, really look at that. But I think it could also cross over to a global event potentially, because Canadian real estate has been a big investment portfolio for a lot of international companies for a long time.
So they're stuck in there on that interest rate too. Now, you know, when you said that, I was thinking, what if Vanguard or BlackRock runs in and buys all those available properties and the deflationary wave does not hit?
Years. Yes, yeah. That's what it is. It's the great taking. It's just going to be one of the biggest swindles we've ever seen, because anybody who knows anything about mortgages know that they're a scam to begin with. The bank doesn't have the money. You show up with the down payment, and then they loan that money back to you 9 times and charge you interest. Then they're going to go and change the interest rate on a loan that they had nothing in it to begin with. It's such a scam, and it's another one of these hoodwinks that people get hosed on because people just don't think about how something works or how the future looks if things go sideways.
Well, that loan valuation is based on your future earnings of your future, you know, addition to the economy. So they're basically loaning your own money back that you would have made in the future back to you as the guarantor for your own. Well, I'm going to get up and go to work every day to have a job, to get a salary. And the bank and our governments, based on that birth certificate, have used that and said, yes, well, it's going to be worth this much per year as long as they're healthy and they can go to work. And then they loan you your same money back that you would earn, but they take more than in addition to what would be scraped out in income taxes. because this whole subscription model thing is where the world's going to.
Yes.
And I bought a lot of software in my time, and I know you have too. But everything that I used to have bought, from Camtasia to like Photoshop and everything else in between, wants you to go to a subscription yearly payment model. Before, it was like you buy it one time. And now it's like the whole real estate thing is becoming a subscription model. Like you bought your house, BlackRock will buy up. They're going to probably swoop every available property, farm property, city properties, apartments, neighborhoods, whatever. And then they're going to re-rent everything back. So you're going to become a perpetual renter.
Yes, exactly. And with no guarantee.
Subscription model.
Because it's, you will owe nothing to be happy, right? We know the model. We've been noticed. We've been all given notice on this stuff. And yeah, as you said, I mean, the subscription model in a way is nothing new, but they've just found ways to get more value out of you from it. In that these guys are so greedy, not only is it not enough for them to just print the money and give it to us or lend it to us, but they want even more out of that. And that's what's really troubling to me in so many ways when I think about this potential, which I think is a mathematical certainty starting 2024, that at the end of that 5-year cycle that people signed into in 2019 is a mathematical certainty that most people won't be able to afford their mortgage renewal. And so, yeah, you look at that and you go, well, how criminal is it that nothing changed for the bank? Nothing. Right? You signed in, you signed the document, and all of a sudden in 5 years they get to change the interest rate. It's criminal that it ever even happened that way in Canada, that was even allowed, but it did because people didn't speak up and do anything about it. And so here we are. And how criminal is it that you paid into a house for the last 10 years? You appreciated the asset, you put things into it, you made a nice garden, you built some fences and some roads, and then they're going to take it. And you are the only one that created value. It's absolutely insane. But when we look at the macro, guys like Mike Adams talk about this stuff. They're telling us what they want. And you can see the road is paved clearly if these economic mathematical certainties come to a head.
Where do we find value in that ourselves? Okay, so we can game it out and say, all right, this is going to be a high percentage unless everybody says no at the same time and refuses to vacate their properties.
Exactly. I tweeted the exact same thing this morning.
Oh yeah, I and again, this is organic. We'd never plan it. We just said, hey, we're going to talk about economy going down. Where's the value prop in that? That's all we said before this talk. So it's pretty interesting that we're overlaying and we're seeing the same things on two different ends of the spectrum. He's more on ag side and ag business side, where I'm looking at an economy side, and also property side of things too. But, a lot of this dovetails in the middle. So where does it come? Okay, so what a lot of people could say no, and then it would stop to a point. But let's say it doesn't stop and people do, vacate their homes. Then where can you provide value in that chain? Is it where they relocate to a new home, then you set them up for food production so they can at least cut some of the cost out of life by raising their own food, growing their own, or having a few chickens, pigeons, or whatever it might be in the backyard there? I mean, is it setting them up for food production? Or, I mean, how does it, or is there going to be a new stipulation, and that property could be tokenized for the Bank for International Settlements on their SELA project, SELA project, and project Aurum, where they want to tokenize every asset on the planet and assign a value to it so it never moves? So they can put a stable coin issued against that, because one will always equal one on their smart contract. It will not deviate 1/100,000th of a cent ever. And then you're going to get locked into that type of property where they'll put an asset stipulation on it. Well, you're not allowed to grow your own food if you rent this property. If you do.
Absolutely. And that's where the solution or the remedy is for people is that if they can get ahead on this, they can do something. And what they do specifically will be, dictated by their own context or the things that they need. But yes, I think that's, you went ahead on me on the tokenization, but that's because you're ahead on those things and you pay attention to that stuff. That's why I watch the Adapt 2030 channel, is for that kind of information. You're sometimes more ahead of it than a lot of guys, but further still, yes, of course, growing the food and all that, but you got to make sure that and I think we're getting closer and closer to crunch time. And that sounds cliche to sound in our genre, But I really am feeling it. I feel it in the local economy. I feel it in the global economy. I'm seeing a lot of people get affected by a lot of things right now. And so you don't want to be moving to the country and getting prepped when everybody else is wanting to get prepped. You think about down in Tennessee, you got Memphis on one side, and you got Nashville in the middle, and you got Chattanooga, some bigger, some decent sized towns in there. A city is only functions when the trucks come in. But when the trucks stop coming in, there's a lot of people in the cities that have zero knowledge of the outdoors, nature, and thus how to live and survive on it. But they don't know the first thing. And so could you imagine a city like Memphis, Tennessee, under extreme circumstances? There's no food, the water turned off, the power's out, whatever it is. I mean, you don't want to be anywhere near that. And if you are, you make sure you want to be off the highways and kind of tucked away. But yeah, you want to be ahead on these things and have these things going now. Is it too late to start? It's never too late to start. But if you are doing this when everybody else is getting woke at the same time, then the chances, this is every zombie apocalypse movie you can ever imagine, right? Everybody's on the highway, gridlocked. Nobody's moving. You might have a full tank of gas in your car, but you're not going anywhere. And so you want to get ahead on these things. And where we could go with that, I'll let you decide.
Yeah, you think about people are getting ready. So what are some of the things that you're seeing disappear, again, that you could hold as a store of value that also could be utilized to provide more value? And right away, the low-hanging fruit, with no pun intended, would be seeds.
Seeds, of course, yeah.
Because you could set people up
Absolutely.
with a garden, and then they run the gardens, or you have a community of people running gardens, and then divvying out some of that produce and whatnot. So setting up, that's your wheelhouse, and you are more adept, like lifetimes ahead than I am, because you worked it, you lived it. That was what you did for your income for years and years and years, and then teaching others and having all those courses to teach others on how to do the basics, like the microgreens, which, thank you, I learned from you, practice, made mistakes, and kind of refined my thing after watching all of your courses. That's really what we got me into doing the microgreens, was watching you provide all that value for free, everybody out there. And, made an effect on my life, knowing that a bag of seeds could turn into food in a tray in a matter of a week or two maximum. And then experimenting with the different types of microgreens, and then knowing that you could expand that. And what, one thing that was the key for me was doing those trays of microgreens. Even when you cut everything down, there's always going to be stragglers left over in there. And we used to take those and then actually put them out in the garden. So we would use those as sort of the seed starter tray, in addition to the food tray. And then, boom, and then the garden starts to grow a little bit, and you're like, whoa, no, then just one thing leads and snowballs to the next. So what is something that you could buy now that could provide value for others later? I'll start the list with seeds then. Curtis, what do you think? Can you add a couple?
Well, seeds, any kind of tools. I mean, I'm long on tools. People ask me what I'm invested in these days. Tools, infrastructure, irrigation supplies, any type of equipment that the lower tech, the better. Good quality, low tech tools are actually getting harder and harder to come by, but they're very important because stuff breaks. And in a Chinese based economy where everything comes from China and that pipeline stops, where are we getting stuff? Manufacturing has been thrown out in North America, Canada, and the US. There's no manufacturing here anymore. And now there's even very little resource development. So tools, equipment, investment in infrastructure on your property, to even things like doing a better driveway or a better cul-de-sac, so you get big turnaround access. Just anything that has a physical value. We could go on this tangent and say gold and silver, but I think I'm beyond that now. I'm actually looking at cashing in metals at this point, because I think we're going to get to a deflationary period. And in Canada in particular, this real estate thing might set that off, but things could be cheap for a little while. So you might want to have some cash available to get those deals, because we saw crazy run up in prices and inflation during the COVID scare. And we're still riding the tail end of that, though. I think some of the supply line issues are a little less crazy as they were when we saw that Suez Canal thing go down and all that kind of stuff. You were reporting on all that. And but now we've got this phase where we're kind of in this sideways thing where maybe it's stagflation or something. And But we're gonna get to the point where things are cheap. I mean, you go on Facebook Marketplace right now, there's so much stuff for sale that I'd love to see some data on it. What's for sale now based on, because all I can just look at my eyes, but I can just and look at it and see how much stuff there is you're going to need cash and things that are liquid as well. So seeds are actually a great one, as you said, because seeds, if you keep them well, and it's easy to spoil seeds, and it cool, dark, and dry is very important when it comes to seeds. But seeds could be a currency in a way. They're so valuable, and they're portable, right? They're divisible, and seeds actually meet a lot of the criteria of what actually makes good money. Of course, metals are great, but I mean, for myself, I'm not buying metals right now. I'd rather have some cash. So, yeah, that's what I would say is, focus on things that you can use mostly, stuff that you can take with you. If you're not land secure, focus on tools and infrastructure that's mobile, stuff that you can take and set up somewhere else. If you got a rock behind rototiller tractor, anything like that, that stuff's going to be very valuable. And you got to have stored fuel. If you're storing fuel for a gas generator, it better be premium boat gas. If you're storing diesel, you got to get stabilized if you want to hold it for more than 6 months to a year. Propane's a good one. It stores for a long time, harder to transport. But yeah, some food for thought there.
Yeah, I've had some gas go bad, especially once I like to pour it out into a mason jar and then, look at it, shake it. But once you can actually see whatever it looks like gelatin in there moving around. You're like, that's gone,
Wow. Yep.
And that really wasn't long. It was a year, maybe a little more than a year. And you're right. Anything that maybe I would even stretch it and say a year and 3 months max. And still, even starting in a dark environment, it's just with that ethanol in there, unless you're getting 100% gas, these are all real good things to think about. You might spend that extra 50 to 75 cents a gallon, but you're only, at a 5 gallon or 10 gallon, something like your big whoop, it's an extra $7.50 or on 10 gallons. But to be able to store it for 2 to 3 times as long is going to be something that you can't buy the time.
That's right. Exactly. And that's the thing in general too. I've been thinking a lot about this it's the time we think about going to the macro a little bit and think about this agenda that's being rolled out. Channels like you are covering this on a daily basis, but you look at the words of these technocrats and what they want. But the thing is that they have that we don't is that it's kind of like the old saying is it doesn't matter who you vote for, the government always wins, is that there's powers that be in the shadows that are managing the government, the deep state. I'm sure that's not a controversial conversation in your audience, but they have the time to move this forward and stall things if they want. If there's too much resistance in one way or the other, hey, they can go to plan B. They got time because this agenda goes far above and beyond just the lifetimes of Hillary Clinton and John Podesta and Henry Kissinger, right? So they got the time. We don't. And you've got your life. And, one thing I think is important to keep in perspective when we're discussing things like this is that at the end of the day, if you aren't enjoying your life, they're already winning. And
That's
so,
right.
we might all end up in the proverbial gulag. I don't think we will, but let's just say for the sake of a hypothetical conversation, we're all going to end up in the gulag and Agenda 2030 when that gets implemented. Again, I don't believe that, but just assume that because I want to help dispel fear for people is that you still got, 6 years until that happens. Do you want to enjoy those 6 years or do you want to live in fear and scarcity and paranoia in those 6 years? So I say, I love sort of a holistic context of things. And I love stacking functions in a permaculture way is that you get yourself closer to the land now. You get yourself closer to some degree of food security and then food sovereignty, water security, then water sovereignty, energy security, then energy sovereignty, and so on and so forth. Get yourself close to those things now. What you'll find is, heck, I actually like doing this. I like being outside. I like growing my own food. My kids like it. I like working physically. I like planting trees. I like clearing land. I like making ponds. All these things are really enjoyable. So there's an opportunity to prepare for what I consider a mathematical certainty. But you can also enjoy doing it at the same time.
Yeah, it's like when I was out earlier feeding the turkeys, I had to walk across the field out there because we keep them far in the back because they're but it was a little chilly and windy today, and I got that little nip in the air, but breathing that fresh air and getting that bite from nature as this front's coming in today. I was like, wake up and, breathe it, feel the change of the energy, because that energetic change that's in the air, can enliven you as well and really give you a lot of life energy that you don't get stuck in a room somewhere. Just being touched by that, that ether. If Tesla's talking about drawing out of the atmosphere a static that always is there, there's always a charge current base that's in our atmosphere, and it changes with the height off the ground, but generally we're in the 2-meter area. There's always a current charge of millivolts around there. So if you're out and immersed in that, your energy should always be higher than if you're in some disruptive kind of cocoon area, whether it be drywall or whether it be stucco or concrete or rebar or whatever.
Or in a city, right?
In a city, yeah, you don't get that millivolt.
No, you get this discombobulated energy that's all over the place. I mean, human beings, at least from the history that we taught in high school, and anybody who follows your channel know that that's a bunch of BS for the most part. But cities, even in that historical viewpoint, we haven't been living in cities that long, human beings. There's sort of this experiment, and I think you've even talked about that mouse experiment in the past, the mouse utopia experiment, and how that all fell apart. I mean, if you really want to just look at a macro and forget all the rhetoric, forget all the latest WHO, UN documents, what the latest Klaus Schwab zinger is. You could just look at that and say, yeah, I mean, maybe we're running to the tail end of a failed experiment, that the American mosaic and these cities with suburbs and all of these ways that we stack people into not really that good of living situations. Maybe that's time that corrected, and we go to something that is more closer to God's creation. That's how I look at it, man. And I wake up every morning, I come out and my view up here is unbelievable. We just blessed. And I go, at the end of the day, whatever happens in the economy happens, but I wake up, I got my food close to me. I got multiple sources of water year round close to me. I've got my own independent power source. I've got a lot of saved things stored up. I got tools. We'll get through it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what it really is about is being closer to God's creation versus being immersed and swimming in man's creation. Is that nature, the soil, the water, the air, the trees, these things are God's creation. And I think the more we get back to those things, I think the better we're going to be in the long run.
Yeah, I'll bring you up. Okay, so let's use the 10,000 years since the exit out of the Younger Dryas era that plunges into global cooling and then back out again. So when people say, oh, there might be a solar flare, or oh, there could be, what's that project, dark winter or Polygon that's going to wipe out the net, it's going to take us back to a pre-industrial state of being. You got to realize from that last 10,000 years, we've been in pre-industrial for 850 of those years. And this last 150 years is the only time out of that last 10,000 that we've not been in a pre-industrial age. The rest of this post-industrial is a 150-year experiment or time period. So if you go back, you're talking hundreds of times of time, literally, well, that would be 15,000 years, but let's say 80 times longer have we been in the pre-industrial age. And that's the way baseline existence was, according to the real history. Now, was it or wasn't it? Compressed air energy technologies had been around since the Roman era, rediscovered and reutilized in the 1750s, the start of the industrial era. But, you're dusting off Roman technology at that point. But I follow the timeline, and I'll stay with it just for the experiment here. But when people talk about pre-industrial, oh, I can't live there, it'd be too difficult, it'd be this. No, we've lived in that time, like I said, 80 times longer than anything that we've been with this electrical age. So put that in perspective, and then your whole thought of how difficult it could be to survive in there or adjust to that, just suddenly it takes on a whole different way to look at it. Literally, the veil is like, whoa, that's just normal. The way humans lived, we all can live that way again.
It does. And you know what, just to play devil's advocate, just because you and I can riff on these things for a long time, just to play devil's advocate on that, the one variable that I can observe that is different than perhaps what might have been back then, when we talk about pre-industrial time, is that humans have done some crazy stuff to the environment. I'm not talking about even dumping oil in the ocean, or sort of the cliche environmentalist things. But the geoengineering and genetic modification has really gone far, that I often wonder if, what does recovery look like when that, you think about these things in sort of a metaphorical way, that they're kind of like a drug addiction, or they're sort of a, especially with the geoengineering, it's hard to get your head around why they would do it, though it's all on the record, and it's all government documents on every country, you can find it, no problem. But then look at the genetic modification, and how the fact that you might have found even 50 years ago that there was thousands of varieties of carrots that were readily available, and that the Green Revolution basically bred down varieties of plants that were so much more resilient than these turn and burn genetically modified ones, that we've been kind of burning our supply of biodiversity in a way. And so that, that alone is kind of troubling. When you look at the effects geoengineering has have on forests, even in Canada where I live. I mean, it's crazy. And that's where I go, I wonder if there's a wild card. The eternal optimist in me says that we are adaptable, and that we'll adapt to anything, and we'll get through anything. But it certainly raises concern for me when I just look at the amount of tinkering going on. So guys like Bill Gates want to block out the sun. It gets to a point where it might, being on our homestead with all of our resilience and anti-fragility will get us the longest for sure. But it gets to, at what point you go, well, how long can you go without the sun?
Ask the dinosaurs. It wasn't really about the impact that killed them. It was about the dust cloud that went out and went around the planet for a century, that locked and blocked out a lot of vegetative production. There was no leaf production, and then that whole hierarchy of animals. That's why the smallest ones survived. And again, it makes me wonder, if we come down, are the pygmy of whatever continent that you're looking at, either the humans that are incredibly small in comparison, a lot of hill tribe people are much smaller than like the super giant girthy 6'7" dude from Holland. You go over to places in northern Thailand where they're still at like 5'6", or 4'6" for the women, 5 foot for the men. They don't need as much resource, literally. And then if you go and you talk about the quote unquote pygmy tribes in different areas across whatever continent it would be, from Indonesia to Africa or whatever, you talk about somebody who's 3'5". What kind of amount of resources would they consume versus me that's like 6'4"? I mean, just the amount of nutrients to keep that body functioning, moving, and going. I'm almost wondering, like we look at Australopithecus and we look at Neanderthals and Denisovans. I mean, they were supposedly so much larger, 7 foot tall, 6'8", super giant, girthy, comparatively. So if there was some disruption in food supply, the very nimble, what we consider Homo sapiens sapien, us, would be more nimble to get around. We would require less resources. We could consume different things. And I'm just wondering if it does happen again, if this is a reduction in larger human species of anything above 5 foot that will be, and then the next one would be a step down into only the smallest of humans across the planet would be survivors through this, and what we would be considered, and we'd have our own classification eventually of the 6 foot tall magnon that would be into the future, looking back in time here, because everybody at that time, tens of thousands or 50,000 years into the future, 80,000 years in the future, would only be 3'5" or 4 foot would be a giant at that point. Right. Looking back at us as we look back at what we consider some of these gigantic species. Just a mind play here, just a weird mind experiment.
Well, did you ever see that Hollywood movie that came about? What was it? Not too long ago, where they shrink them.
Yeah, the miniature people or something. That was
in the name of climate change. Shrink yourself to 1 100th, and you can go live in this utopia. And that because it's in an area of inflation, and so your money will go 100 times further if you shrink yourself and go live. Reminds me of that a little bit, but yeah, I think moreover, to your point though, just putting the size of the individual aside, just the Western diet and the dependence on massive amounts of infrastructure to deliver the basic calories to people, most people are just maladapted. I mean, you think about the average American, I saw these funny images recently where I saw it on my Twitter feed. I don't know where it came from, but somebody said, took those AI generators to just generate images now, and you can do it a dime a dozen. They got asked Europeans to just generate images of what they thought Americans were. And of course, it's like the cliche from Idiocracy where people are overweight and they're sipping Pepsi and Coke and whatever. But just imagine that cliche of somebody who has to forage, hunt, or grow their own food. Forget about it. Forget about it. The thing that part of the reason I live in a cold climate over a warmer climate is that my biggest concern for risk when things hit the fan is not from the state. It's not from the economy or any of that. It's from the starving masses. And the thing that I like about where I live is that I live in an extremely low population area. We don't have desperate people coming across, like, say, the Texas border right now, up to 8,000 people a day flooding across. Those are people that are desperate, and they'll do anything it takes to survive. And they're probably more adapted to survive than most Americans, because if you're from a poor country, the lights go out for you all the time. Big deal. That's day in the life. You got to scrounge up some food from things. Big deal. You're used to that. The average American, forget about it. And so when we start to see, and I pray that we don't, I pray that things change, people wake up, and we steer this whole ship in a different direction. But when I look at the numbers, and I just go, the average American or Canadian urbanite coming out of this, they have nothing. And, once things get really hairy is when you start to see men who have starving children. And that's the guy I don't want to see. And so that's why I've chosen to kind of hunker down and live in a place that has a winter, because if the starving masses want to get out of the city in the wintertime, they're not getting that far, especially on foot. So I like that as a form of security, in a sense, is that's my big thing. My big black swan is the starving masses over whatever Klaus Schwab's got for us next and all that.
And then afterwards, I had a guy who I know knows a lot about security. He came out and spent a week with me, or a weekend out here with me. And he's like, yeah, man, you got too complacent and too comfortable on your own land. That's how most people get taken down, is they get so complacent and comfortable that this is your safety spot, that this is it, that you let your guard down because you're in your own safest area around, because the rest of the world's out there, and they really won't get out here until it's too late. And you should have some warning, and you should have preparation. And by that time, you'll be able to get everything to protect yourself. And he's like, that's not the way it is. He's ex-Army guy. He's like, your blind spot is your comfort on your own bug out spot or on your own farmland that you think
it's
like
so
a far out
bias.
here, I learned a lesson from that, really did. And it really freaked me out too for a minute. And we got much more adept with security right after that.
I mean, that's what you guys got to think about. I mean, everybody's got different circumstances, right? I mean, there's pros and cons to live everywhere. I mean, I still, where you live, I mean, I still tell people all the time, we run our Homestead Accelerator program, and, I'm looking at real estate primarily in the southeast of the United States, because that's where most of the good stuff is. There's more inventory. There's just people. So there's more competition. There's just more stuff. And so it's a great place to live. But, every place has its risks. And for me, population is number one, but you can still hide out in Tennessee. You can still hide out in Alabama. You can still hide out in Oklahoma, Kentucky. These are a lot of good places in that area where you can get to these days and still be tucked away, despite the fact that the majority of the U.S. population is on that side of the continent. But most of them are stacked in cities, and they will not get that far, because if everybody tries to get out of the city at the same time, nobody's getting out. And so you want to think about, if you're going to be one of these urban preppers, a lot of these guys are talking about, these e-bikes now that got, 100 miles of charge on a battery. You want to look at things like that. How can you get out when everybody else is trying to get out? You're not getting out in your car. There's no way. And you're not.
Somebody will strip you of that bike in like a few seconds after they see you.
That's true too. And you got to be careful. And that's really only a plan for the lone wolf. What about guys who have families? What if you got 3 kids and wife? That's not a solution. And so, yeah, I mean, I would rather just be like you and I and be way out of it, way ahead, because you are really rolling the dice if you want to play that sort of Mad Max game and try to, because the variables become, a million variables opposed to 2 or 3 variables. You just saw one on your property there with that woman kind of running up in a panic. But, that might happen a lot more often going forward, and you got to be prepared for those outcomes. But I really like what you said there about being too comfortable, because I find myself feeling that way on my property. I'm in paradise up here. I'm in heaven. We're in the garden with the kids and having a lovely time. And rarely does somebody ever come up our driveway. But what we've done, I won't disclose too many of the security things we've done just for the sake of privacy. But, one really simple thing you can do on a property is at your first gate or your first entrance off the public road, have a no trespassing sign. And that also protects you from government agents, because that was their first notice. And so if they pass that sign of trespassing, now they're in default. Then have a gate and lock that gate. And then have a sign on that gate that says, if you come through this gate, you're trespassing and you've been noticed. And you guys have so many more things you can do with firearms down there too, that there's other steps you can take. But just that alone might have stopped that woman, especially if there was a gate that was closed, whether it was locked or not.
Yeah, they wouldn't have gotten up the driveway at that point.
Yeah. And those are easy things to do, right? That's kind of low-hanging fruit, as you like to say.
Yeah, now, talking with Craig Simpson from Radiant Creators, he served over in Somalia in 94. And so he was over there. And he was telling me about the breakdown, and the complete breakdown took about 4 months total. So there was a complete lawlessness. And he was saying the most dangerous place for farmers to come into the markets to sell food. Like, first they had to get security perimeters up to be even able to hold a market. And they had to get security perimeters up to even be able to establish a secure zone to even give water away to the locals. But once the locals got water and they were traveling the same road everybody was traveling to go back, they were just sitting targets, sitting ducks. So he's like, you got to know they're going to be bandits on the road, and their people are going to be taking advantage, because the roads are going to be, especially the road that everybody took to come in and out of town to the market, or in and out of the area to get water or supplies that were given away by aid agencies and militaries. As soon as they left that secure zone, once they got outside there, everybody knew they were carrying water, no protection. And they were just like locusts descending on the people that were coming in and out of the market. So it took a while for the actual locals to form their own security groups to then battle against what they considered the gangsters. And then that kind of smoothed out after about 4 months. And then there was security in those zones where it wasn't as hectic. But the thing I learned from that is the roads coming in and out, like, you might think, okay, well, I'm still having the cart and then I can go out into the market and I can get the supplies I need. But realize there's going to be people waiting along those roads on those main thoroughfares where everybody's coming in and out. Maybe not like a little tiny country road where 3 people might come in and out. They're not going to waste their resources. But if you're coming in down a double lane country highway or something, and they know that's predominantly where the cars are going to come, or if you're going to walk, and there's like a well-known hiking trail through an area that you're going to walk from point A to point B to save 3 miles instead of going around a long way, you're going to cut through the dark forest there. There's always people going to be waiting for a majority of the foot traffic or bicycle traffic or car traffic is coming through. Keep that in mind in terms of your security preparations. If you're going to come in and out of a zone to try to go get supplies or bring supplies, like you say, trading, if you got an extra and you grew a ton and you want to go take it to a market, you got to realize there's a security risk there too.
Oh,
but that was Somalia, and hopefully it never gets that bad here where.
Well, there's some, to buttress what you're saying a little bit is, a big piece of that is cultural context. And when I'm speccing property for people or myself, I really evaluate the cultural context if it needs to be. Most of the properties we look at in the United States don't really need to be. They can be dependent on your proximity to an urban center like Memphis, which is a completely different city than a place like Nashville. 2 polar opposite cities in the same state. But Somalia, what you find if you've traveled, and I know you've traveled quite a bit too in your past, what I've observed in poor countries is that people generally, if it's really grinding poverty, people don't generally trust each other, because if you can't build capital or wealth without trust. Because if you're constantly worried about looking over your shoulder, you don't take a lot of risks, right? Because in order to build wealth, you got to take risks. So the context in Somalia hopefully is a lot different than what it looks like if things fall apart in, Eastern Tennessee or Southern British Columbia, where I live, based on some of our demographics. And part of the reason why I chose to live where I do, there's a high level of trust. And for me, when I think about when times get tough, it's one of those 8 forms of capital that's probably your most valuable asset, which is your social capital, your network, your friendships, your relationships, your business acquaintances. All of those things become 10 times more valuable if times get tough, because you know what? Like, I'll tell you, I had a challenge in my personal life recently, and I had some people who really showed up for me, and they did that because I showed up for them. And, a lot of these guys that expatriate to places like Nicaragua and Ecuador, Paraguay, Uruguay, what have you, you go down there, you're the gringo, you're the new guy, right? You don't have that network that you might have in Tennessee, where your neighbors, kind of what's going around you. You might live up in Kentucky in some of the Amish areas, and those could be some of the best places to be preppers in, because, with COVID and all that stuff, that, we saw Amish didn't really get that affected. But the point I guess I'm trying to make is, it's really important to evaluate that community and that social network and that cultural context when you're really thinking about where you want to be when the proverbial SHTF.
Yeah, because we're 1.5 hours from Knoxville and 1.5 hours from Chattanooga. So you got to think about a tank of gas and
Yes.
clogged roads, and they're going to be doing return trips. Now, that whole Memphis thing, you got to remember, across the river over there is Little Rock, Arkansas also. So it's not like it's just Memphis, providing the bridges are still functional and aren't closed off.
Yes.
You got 2 massive cities for those 2 states that are right next to each other. And everything's within a tank of gas there. You can go from Memphis to Nashville and then back again on a tank of gas.
Yep.
So how far is it going out and how far is it coming back? But then how clogged are the roads going to be? And again, how many people are carrying maps in their cars and really know where they want to go? Because if you get in, okay, so let's say people get locked in the city and they all want to leave at the same time. Do they really have a planned destination in mind? Or is it more of a, we just got to leave and we got to get out, we got to get somewhere? Because the chances of you finding them, if you're going to roll the dice and they're actually going to find your place that's way out there, and they're going to take the correct number of left turn, right turn, left turn, right turn, right turn, right turn, left turn, turn, and then they finally get out to your place way up there, like the chances of all those people coming out and actually getting out to where you are is going to be rather thin unless they have a map location and they've already chosen that specific destination to go to as their safety spot. But if they're just a wandering horde just going out, I think they're just going to kind of get lost in the back roads and run out of gas and just wherever they turn.
Will, and they'll fight each other. And yeah, absolutely. One thing came to mind when you said that is, an important thing for people to consider is that, if you're like many Americans who, you're not set up as much as you'd like to be, you're thinking about this stuff and you're thinking, yeah, what do we do? But what you said actually just reminded me of something so important, is that, what is your destination? You want to have, thinking about destination A and destination B and multiple ways to get to both, and be able to navigate those things without a cell phone. And how are you going to get there? Because you're going to find, just like in all these zombie apocalypse shows and movies, is that, and you pointed out too, with those thoughts about the roads in Somalia, I mean, you better have multiple plans and multiple ways to think about these things, strategies, plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D. I mean, you really got to think about that, because nothing is going to go as planned. And you know what? Nothing ever really does anyways. You come up with, like, I had, no, I had a big vision. I'm on 3 years onto this homestead build project now here, and you've been doing a lot of that yourself as well. But I had this plan when I designed all this stuff, but then you get in there and now you start figuring things out. Oh, well, I thought I could put this thing here, but I'm nope. Bedrock. Can't do that, whatever it's going to be. And so you got to think on your feet, and the way another thing I say to people is, that's why it's always good just to get started in anything, is because you got to just start greasing the wheels, because you can't just say, oh, I'm going to grow food when the shit hits the fan.
Oh, too late.
Doesn't work that way. No, way too late. You're going to start now and get good at it and learn and observe and apply the lessons to the next season, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, you got to get your feet wet now, no matter what it is, what we're talking about here.
Yeah, because we're turning over into our winter garden now, getting the row cover out there and the hoops and everything, even for the winter garden. Now, Curtis, you might know a little bit. I'm just going to roll off a list of things. We got turnips, beets, kohlrabi. What else? We got kale, spinach, broccolini, lettuce. And I think that's, oh, the mustards, the mustard greens. We got a special type of mustard green that's better for eating. It's not, it's just one better suited for eating than others. So that would be our list that we're trying to put out, and just do row cover. And, you know, we got flip over boxes where they're on hinges where you can take it off so you can.
Yep.
So what are some other things that you think you might be able to grow during the winter in addition to that list? And anybody who doesn't know what row cover is, just a simple cloth. And down here in Tennessee, we're at zone 7A. So it's a little bit warmer. You know, it doesn't need to be super thick. A lot of light can still penetrate. It keeps the wind and it kind of frost off it. And these veggies are known to do pretty well. We didn't do anything with carrots because we haven't had any luck with carrots. For some reason, we just never have here.
It's every farmer I know in Tennessee has always struggled with carrots. There are some techniques you can do to really knock it out of the park with carrots. No question. But I would say, you know, for starters, those vegetables you mentioned are really good for 7B, was it? You are?
Yeah, 7A.
Oh, 7A. Okay. So you might be late on some of those, you know, to start from seed. I mean, it depends if you're transplanting. I mean, the way I approach a winter garden, I mean, I'm zone 5 here. It's cold climate, but it's not extremely cold. I'm thinking about my winter garden in July here. Down in a zone 7A, I think you can really start in September. You can get some really big stuff in, like carrots. Even pushing mid-September, you can do that in Tennessee. If you got greenhouses too, that makes a huge difference. But yeah, no, I wouldn't change much. I probably would have added kale or collard greens to that. And you could do some, you know, you can start doing some early potatoes you could plant in September, October, even maybe some Norlands, some Warbas, some of the quicker growing varieties, you can push those. But, you know, for me, David, the winter garden is more about a garnish than it is a meal. So our diet on our homestead changes in the sense that, yes, I do have a winter garden. I mean, I've got a passive solar greenhouse right behind me where I can do stuff year round, but I don't want to leverage those things too much because sometimes they can be risky. And so what you really want to do is focus mostly on your main season, and that you're doing a big, significant harvest in the fall, and then you've got a root cellar and the capacity to process, dehydrate, can, preserve those things. And, you know, it's not really until you get into zones 8 and beyond where you don't really have to think about that stuff as much, even into the tropics, then you can change your diet. But you're still in technically a cold climate. You're temperate cold, you know, you're temperate climate down in Tennessee, zone 7. And so you don't really get a winter like I do, but you do get prolonged periods where there's not a lot of sunlight and it's cloudy and rainy. I know what a Tennessee winter's like, and not much grows. So you really got to have things established going into the winter mostly. That's what it's about. I just call it, that's your Pareto. That's your 80% is there. And then a lot of those things you listed, yeah, you can start those things, have them in the tunnels and whatnot, and they'll feed you something and give you some sustenance. But your real calories are going to come from your animals, your protein sources, and your stored crops, right? Your potatoes, beets are a good one too. Carrots are great, but you know, the leafy greens and microgreens only get you so far, but they're good and necessary. But in winter, you need those proteins and that comfort food.
Yeah, proteins. Hit up your Amish farm. They, as a matter of fact, I got the new list here. So we got 2 different prices from 2 different farms here. So hogs are going from $1.40 to $1.60 a pound, and you're to 200-pound minimum on that, and 205 is from the other farm at 200 about, and then it's $1.75 or $1.45 for smoking anything, because we got a hog, and then we're getting all the ham from that and the shoulders, and then the bacon, everything's smoked. And then the lamb prices here, $2.75 a pound. That is up from $2 a couple years ago, or even $1.75 2 years ago. And here at the other farm, it's $3.15 versus $2.75, and everything is minimum or at 100 pounds.
What are you paying per pound for chicken and turkey?
They don't. They only have lamb, calf, and hog. We got the turkeys, but we're not going to really harvest anything this year. We don't need to, so we'll let them, you know, go through another year, I guess. And plus we have a bunch of toms. So we're trying to trade off the toms to get, you know, some females in there so we can get some eggs out of it too. Yeah. We're not really into butchering the birds because we want to keep them for egg layers. That's sort of our main purpose.
Right.
The animal fats, though, bang for your buck is going to be the pork that's not injected with anything, doesn't go through a USDA facility. They just feed it the corn that they grow on their land, and nothing's in that. So think about pork, and especially rendering fat, and you can can up that fat, because when I was over there at the guy who sells this, he brought me out some canned fat that they'd rendered themselves. And the light bulb went on, like, you can can fat and like store it. Okay. Anyway, I thought you had to freeze it.
We do that. Yeah, we do that too.
And then the calves here, $1.60 to $2 a pound for anything 800 to 1,000. And then if you decide to go to 1,200 pounds, it comes down a little bit in price. That's a one farm at about, let's say, $2 a pound for the calves. But then the other farm is $2.65 a pound. So even within the Amish themselves, the range on the beef. So look at that. If you're talking about 1,000-pound animal and it's a 65 cents difference per pound on that, you're talking about $650,
Yes.
Just on that same animal, by driving an extra half hour to another place to go get that, if they have available supply. But meat and fat is going to be your main thing to be concerned with. And, I'm trying to just tell you how I'm covering my bases, because we start, and again, this human capital of working with the Amish, understanding them, let them know you're in the community, helping them when they might need to pick something up, because I got a pickup truck. I've taken fat from one farm processing to another, back to these guys again. So that kind of capital that you get of being a team player around in that area,
absolutely,
you can't buy that. It's either they trust you or they don't.
That's right. And here's some more buttressing that for food for thought is, no, you can't buy that. And when times get tough, that won't even be an option for you, because the doors are closed, right? So those things need to happen now. You need to front load those things. But here, let me give you some food for thought on the chicken front, because that's kind of mostly where I've gone. My land doesn't accommodate ruminant animals, though I might be able to integrate some goats and sheep potentially here at some point, but definitely not cows. And that came from Joel Salatin's looking at my property. Joel's a friend.
I went up to Joel's farm up in Virginia.
I know you did. Yeah, I know. I watched the video with you talking to Dan.
Did you?
That was great.
I interviewed his son. Yeah.
Yeah. But, on the chicken front, the cool thing about chickens, you get into some of the hybrid where you've got the dual purpose bird. Okay. You've got their layer and a meat bird. They're actually dual purpose birds, I find, are, at least with my experience, the best layers. And they're an okay meat bird. They're going to be probably 50% less than your typical meat bird, whether you're talking about a rustic red or a Freedom Ranger or Cornish hen. I wouldn't do Cornish hens on trying to be a resilient homestead, because they're factory farm chickens. They're unresilient. They don't forage very well for feed. I want to be able to get my flock, because they say with chickens, they need 3 types of food and in thirds: grain, greens, and grubs. So grubs are bugs. You can feed chickens on 2. And if you do that, you'll get half the egg production, but that's not so bad. So you imagine in tough times, you can't get the grain, right? We saw shortages of chicken feed. You were reporting on that a couple of years ago. We saw the feed that was causing people not to, the chickens weren't laying eggs properly, whatnot. But you look at some of these dual purpose birds, and what you can do, and I'm doing this now, is you can start breeding, and you can get a number of your hens to go broody. They actually want to do it usually in the spring. They just do it naturally. And if you accommodate that, you can hatch out a number of clutches of chicks. And if those are dual purpose birds, and no problem. Like, I mean, I really only need to raise 30 to 40 birds for meat for my family for a year. That's not hard to do. It really isn't. I might scale that up now if I go into sort of dark times. I can't get grain, but that's another thing. I buy my feed a year at a time, so I'm sitting on over a year's worth of feed right now for my meat and layers, and so I'm sitting good there. I've got the feed now, but if I don't get it, I'm going to look at leaning things out, getting rid of birds that aren't producing, and then start just having these hens raise clutches. And then go and you might have to do a few crops a year, but that's okay. You can be autonomous with meat birds. I don't think it's that difficult. But yeah, the eggs are definitely pound for pound of what you put in is good. The thing that I like about meat birds that layers don't do is that it's hard to move layers around unless you have the infrastructure and the right land to do it. So generally my layers stay in one or two areas, but my meat birds, I can rotate from plot to plot to plot. So I can use them as a regenerative soil building tool infrastructure and get a product out at the end. And so meat birds are so adaptable and their life is always kind of moving around. So they're used to that. You can, have them on this plot. They can finish off your garden. Like what they do, I garden with my chickens now. And I plant plots or little segments of land, just like people know my work for. I still do things in 30-inch beds. And then when that plot's finished, I try to time my crops so that each plot kind of crops out at the same time. Throw the chickens in there. Sometimes those chickens can be on that plot, depending on the crop, for weeks. And they'll even do some work for you that's really interesting. I learned this year, just from experimenting, that I can grow dry beans, okay, direct seeded in the ground, get a 6-inch spacing, 3 or 4 rows on a 30-inch bed. Crop comes, gets to desiccation point. So I stop irrigating it, late summer. It dries up. Chickens come in. They don't eat the beans. They just eat the foliage on the plants. So they actually do me a service. They strip down the plant. So when I go to harvest the dry beans, I'm pulling out plants with dried bean husks on them, full of seeds with no foliage. So it actually makes my handling of it less work. So these are the kinds of things that I'm discovering with chickens. Layers just don't do it as well. Meat birds seem to be a little bit more adaptable in the way they move around, which is, it's work, right? Anything you can stack a function. This is permaculture thinking, right? How do I do less work in less time and then get a positive externality out of it? In my case, that's soil resilience, building up that soil fertility, that soil food web, and then get a product out at the end. So it's sort of a trifecta of the work. And when you get into tough times and the resources aren't there, you want that trifecta, because if you're just chasing your tail of this closed loop system where you need inputs constantly, that's not going to get you very far.
Yeah, that's good advice, because aside from the buckwheat, and I'm putting out some millet this year as well, but the buckwheat did really, really, really well for us. I mean, it was scatter and you go, and it really came up. And then we cut it the first time for the forage, got it the second time to make it to seed. The only problem I had here was there's not a lot of guys around that have any kind of combines that are set for buckwheat. Almost everything, it's very specific and not a well-known crop anymore. I mean, there are some areas, yes, obviously in America, like they do sorghum, but sorghum, aside from somebody that's going to do it and then try to squeeze the stalks and then do some sort of molasses out of that, otherwise sorghum's not really a thing. So they're very special crops. Like millet's not a big crop either. Spelt's not another. So once you get back toward these more ancient grains, you'll find that the mechanized, what used to be abundant machinery for all those farmers that used to grow those types of things, we had to do it by hand. So stripping those things off and getting all the, once the buckwheat came up to seed, put your gloves on, but then you got all that detritus in there with it because you're stripping it off. We're going to have to think of a different way to do it, but we did get a lot of grain out of there. Now, one of the only things is when we stored it up after I was able to use a fan after we got it in the fan, and then it blew everything off, and we were able to pretty much get it down to just seed only after it dried for a minute. Then we got the weevils that came in on it. And that was the thing that destroyed, like we didn't store properly. So here's my question for you. You're talking about buying a year advance. We go like three months out on like the feed, chicken feed and whatever. We get in and we'll fill up the truck when we do it, so we don't have to do so many runs. Problem with the mice also. So now we're scattering cayenne pepper all around the barn, trying to put mint oils on cotton balls all around the barn to stop these mice from coming in. We don't have any cats. So last question here. How are you able to store everything without getting lost from nature wanting to come in and then nibble everything? Because I've had 2 types of losses that I keep, and I'm really hoping that we can stop this, is the weevils coming in and hitting the grain crops. They also hit the, the winter rye. They got into the bags of winter rye. So those are the 2 big things. I ended up storing it in barrels and putting cayenne in the barrels. Winter rye and buckwheat wiped out, at least the bags we left out more in the open, quote unquote, in the back. And then the feed, the mice are coming in. So those are 2 of my main pests. So what do we do about pests? Like your grain storage got to be way different than what I'm doing.
It is. Well, I'm in a sealed steel Quonset. I built, it was one of the first pieces of infrastructure I put in on this property because I just didn't have anything. There's no other infrastructure here except a cabin. So I built a, 24 feet deep, 34 feet wide, 12-foot bay door. It's sealed, so my feed's in there, so I'm not getting the rodents. I did invest in a cat though recently though, and I'm already very pleasantly surprised in the results, I'll tell you. But hey, I wanted to add one thing that you said there before we just wrap up, because I thought I could add value to this. Is you're talking about the buckwheat and how, it's just difficult to manage that crop to get that. Well, I would say, challenge people to start thinking about what the purpose of their garden is. And I'm already doing this, and it's actually been quite liberating, because I've always thought as a vegetable grower, my career came in the urban farmer doing market gardening. The vegetable's the product, right? The primary product. I started thinking about certain crops as secondary products. And what I mean by that is they just become animal feed. And because I've got this infrastructure now where I can move my chickens around fairly easily, even with my challenging geography here, because we're on a mountain, it's not as like open and easy to move around as your place. But, I just start thinking about, hey, do the chickens like this? If they do, I can fence them in on this pasture, grow this crop entirely for them, and then try and experiment. And I would encourage people to try these things. Is don't feed them anything. And maybe try it in small scales or small periods of time just to see what happens. But getting chickens on land where vegetables were grown, you will be amazed what they do. And you can see really quickly what they like and what they don't like. And then you can start tinkering. And so I would say, think about crops growing in a secondary way, in that you have a crop field that maybe you want to do pastured pigs. Maybe pigs can go on there and eat that crop. Maybe it's birds, maybe it's something else. But thinking about it that way, that if you can't utilize that crop, but you want the nutritional benefits from that, if it goes through the belly of an animal, technically you're going to benefit from it if you're eating that animal or eating its egg. So, just kind of put it to you there that there might be another possibility for that crop.
Yeah, wise words. Because originally we had sheep when we were growing for that fodder, because you can get a double rotation on the buckwheat. But we ended up since giving to our neighbor who has much more fenced in land, and he's doing rotational grazing. So he's got far more fenced in land where he can move them from, section to section to section. And then we took over doing the bird production. So we got the geese and the ducks and the chickens and the turkeys. So we kind of split where, we were more on the bird side and he's more on the animal husbandry side with the goats and the sheep. And so again, with your neighbors, being able to split tasks, because we were trying to raise sheep here, and it's like trying to do a steel mill in your own backyard with lumber and trying to get a quality product versus taking it over to like a proper steel mill where they got everything in-house and everything just streamlined,
Yeah, absolutely. That cooperation is key. And having those relationships now, and even discussing those relationships now is important. Like one example I give you is one thing I've discussed with my neighbors pretty extensively is fire. Because in our boreal climate, that's it's a major risk, just like certain weather patterns you guys experience down in eastern Tennessee. Fires are risk up here in the dry boreal winter climate. And so we've got a fire plan. My whole neighborhood in my tiny rural area, where I really only have 5 other properties around me, but this has all been discussed. What's the protocol? How does it go? Who do we call? Where do we go? I've got a really solid fire plan on my property. I've informed some of my neighbors about that. And one of my other neighbors has a fire truck. He keeps it parked right in his driveway, ready to go at a moment's call. And we watch out for each other. Hey, in fire season, I fly my drone up 2 or 3 times a week just to take a look at the periphery. I don't trust the software. I don't trust the internet, what it's telling me. I look up, I go up into the sky and take a look around. I go up on my ridge. I've got, binoculars. I can look around, I've got that vantage point. And so we work together that way too, and so there's all kinds of ways to do it. And I think it's just important to start doing it.
Yeah, and think of a pressure washer. That's one of the things we have is a pressure washer on a 250-gallon flex tank on the back of a pickup. And you'd be surprised, pressure washer, pressure sprayer that's coming out, that, man, you can really suppress a lot of at least grass fire with that thing in like a moment. Yes. It's like,
yep.
And but things got to be gassed up. It's already got to be like 1-2 pulls, and that motor
Ready to
fires
go.
up, and you're shooting
Primed.
water,
Yep.
right? It can't be like, oh, you need to change, can check the oil. Things got to be ready. But it's a little
That's right.
small one, just a portable one, and that's at least part of our, DIY kit, because everything out in the countryside, you got to realize, is half an hour away for even at best for something to get out there. Exactly. Ambulances, fire, whatever, you're on your own. It's like the old days back in the Wild West where it's going to be, half an hour, maybe even longer, if they deem it an emergency or not, before anybody gets out to your place out there.
That's right. And maybe that's a good thing, right? I mean, this has been kind of a general theme for me over the last number of years, but maybe it's a good thing that the challenge we really face is not Klaus Schwab and his cronies, is the opportunity we all have now to step up and own that responsibility. Because look, American culture, Western culture, we've been high on the hog, man. We had a free ride. We've had a gravy train since the baby boomers. And of course, things have been constricting, and life conditions in general are not improving for the average person. But compare that to the rest of the world, we're still high on the hog, but we have further to fall. And that's the thing we gotta keep in mind. But yeah, maybe it's not a bad thing that we got to take responsibility. That's one thing I like about living in the country, because I'm, philosophically, I'm an anarchist. I don't like the state. I don't want to deal with them. I want to take care of things myself, and I'd rather be surrounded by people that do the same, so that when things get tough, I'm not looking at starving masses asking for a handout with pie eyes. I'm looking at people that are saying, how can I help? What can I do? And so I think you're going to get that in the country if you are proactive like you are, and myself, and you start talking about those things with your neighbors and actually start creating a needs and benefits relationship, not just a relationship where you talk about the sports game every Sunday, a relationship where I need you and you need me, and we're better off cooperating.
Solid words to wrap up on. Been talking with Curtis Stone here. I'll leave everything in the description box. Curtis, how can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter now at OffGridStone. I'm posting lots of good stuff there, writing more often. Still up on YouTube.
Still for now.
Yeah, still up on YouTube. Hopefully for much, we'll see. But the algorithm is not in my favor. I'm getting really good feedback on Twitter these days. I'm getting almost more views on Twitter with 5,000 followers than I do with 600,000 on YouTube. So Twitter, YouTube, just search Off Grid with Curtis Stone on YouTube, and freedomfarmers.com is the main platform where we do courses. You've got a link there if people want to check out any of the products and services we have there. Your audience can support you by using that link.
Yeah, and I had linked off to finding the perfect homestead property, and also the microgreens course, because that's the one I found most valuable to get me started on my adventure of thinking of indoor and vertical agriculture in a house that you can still, so I linked that below too, because I thought, at least in my own personal journey, that was my most valuable. And for those also that are ready to, take that leap and jump into a homestead, finding the perfect homestead course is also the one that would be the next most valuable, because once you get the land, then you're going to have to utilize it, or vice versa. If you're at that step where you got too much and you want to go to larger steps, then they kind of cross pollinate. So both those are in the description box below. And again, I thank you for watching. Bye for now.